Alright, Karina baby, for the 29th. I can't sleep. Dr. Dog has been busy in his office all day. I'll go to bed early tonight, he says, and have a good sleep. Dr. Dog puts on his pajamas, brushes his teeth, and gets into bed. He is soon fast asleep and snoring. Suddenly the telephone rings. Bring, bring. Dr. Dog wakes up with a jump and answers it. It's young Molly. I can't sleep, she says. It's nighttime, says Dr. Dog. Moles are supposed to be awake. Go and dig a tunnel. Then Dr. Dog puts the phone down and goes back to bed. He is dreaming peacefully when the phone rings again. Bring, bring. Dr. Dog answers sleepily. This time, it's Mrs. Owl. Son, Hoot. I can't sleep, says Hoot. Owls are supposed to be awake at night, says Dr. Dog. Go and fly through the woods. Dr. Dog yawns and stumps back to bed. He closes his eyes and is just nodding off when, bring, bring, the telephone rings again. And Dr. Dog has to answer it. It's Fox Cub Freddy. I can't sleep, he says. Foxes are supposed to be awake at night, says Dr. Dog. Go for a walk. You might see Mole and Hoot. They're awake too. The next morning, Dr. Dog is sound asleep. At 7 o'clock, his alarm goes off. Cock-a-doodle-doo, cock-a-doodle-doo. But Dr. Dog doesn't hear it. A little later, the telephone rings. Bring, 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 bring. It's Nurse Kitty calling from the office. When Dr. Dog answers it, all he could think to say is, I can't sleep. Well, says Nurse Kitty, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and there are lots of patients waiting here. You should be wide awake. Oh, I can't sleep. Right? That's all he could think to say was, I can't sleep. Alright, let's see. That's actually the perfect book for Papa. Papa stays up all night, every night, because Papa can't sleep. Alright, let's see. If he called Dr. Dog, if Dr. Dog would tell him to stay awake. Look at this. This is the world's best fairy tales. 2 frogs. Once upon a time, in the country of Japan, there lived 2 frogs, one of whom has made a home in a ditch near the town of Osaka, in the sea coast, while the other dwelled in a clear little stream which ran through the city of Kyoto. Kyoto. Kyoto? At such a great distance apart, they had never even heard of each other. But oddly enough, the idea came into both their heads at the same time that they should like to see a little of the world. And the frog who lived in Kyoto wanted to visit Osaka, and the frog who lived near Osaka wished to go to Kyoto, where the great Mikado, M-I-K-A-D-O, Mikado? The great Mikado had his palace. So one fine morning in the spring, they both set out along the road that led from Kyoto to Osaka. Frog coming from Osaka, and one frog coming from Osaka, and the other frog from Kyoto. The journey was more tiring than they expected, for they did not know much about traveling. Not that halfway between the 2 towns there rose a mountain, which had to be climbed. It took them a long while and a great many hops to reach the top. But there they were at last, and what was their surprise of each to see another frog before him. They looked at each other for a moment without speaking, and then fell into conversation, explaining the cause of their meeting so far from their homes. It was delightful to find that they both felt the same wish to learn a little more of their native country. And as there was no sort of hurry, they stretched themselves out in a cool, damp place and agreed that they would have to get a good rest before they parted to go their separate ways. "What a pity we are not bigger," said the Osaka frog, "for then we could see both towns from here and tell if it is worth our while going on." "Oh, that is easily managed," returned the Kayatu frog. "We have only to stand up on our hind legs and..." Oh, look at them helping each other. Looks like they're giving hugs. They're so cute. "And hold on to each other, and then we can each look at the town we are traveling to." The idea pleased Osaka Frog, and as so much that he at once jumped up to put his front feet on the shoulders of his friend, who had risen also. There they both stood, stretching themselves as high as they could, and holding to each other tightly so that they may not fall down. The Kayatu frog turned his nose towards Osaka, and the Osaka frog turned his nose towards Kayatu. But the foolish things forgot that when they stood up, their great eyes lay in the back of their heads, and that though their noses might point to the places to which they wanted to go, their eyes beheld the place from which they had came. "Dear me," cried the Osaka frog, "Kayatu is exactly like Osaka. It is certainly not worth such a long journey. I shall go home." "If I'd had any idea that Osaka was only a copy of Kayatu, I could never have traveled all this way," explained the frog from Kayatu. And as he spoke, he took his hands from his friend's shoulders, and they both fell down in the grass. Then the two frogs took a polite farewell to each other and set off for home again. And to the end of their lives, they believe that Osaka and Kayatu, which are as different to look at as the two towns can be, were alike as two peas. Oh, they didn't know. Alright, baby, let's do the Snow Queen as well, because the Snow Queen is super short. So there's the froggies, and they're looking at their own hometowns, right? They didn't look around. Alright, the next one is the Snow Queen. There was once a dreadfully wicked hobgoblin. One day he was in high good spirits because he had made a mirror which reflected everything that was good and beautiful in such a way that it dwindled almost to nothing. But anything that was bad and ugly stood out very clearly and appeared much worse. The most beautiful landscapes looked like boiled spinach. The nicest people looked like repulsive or something to stand on their heads, or had no middles, and their faces were so distorted that they could not be recognized. And if anyone had a single freckle, you might be sure it would look as if it had spread over his whole nose and mouth. That is the funniest thing about it, thought the hobgoblin. One day the hobgoblin was flying high among the clouds, maliciously flashing his mirror on all the countries below. Suddenly it slipped from his hand and crashed to the earth, shattered into millions and billions of pieces. And now came the greatest mischief of all, for most of the pieces were hardly as large as a grain of sand, and they flew about all over the world. If anyone got a speck of the mirror in his eye, there it stayed. From then on, he would see everything crooked, or else could see only the ugly side of things. For every tiny splinter of glass possessed the same power as the whole mirror. Some people got a splinter in their hearts, and that was dreadful, for then the heart would turn into a lump of ice. A few of the fragments were large enough to be used as window panes, but how horrible it would be to look at one's friend and neighbor through such a window. The hobgoblin was so pleased he laughed till his sides ached, and his tiny bits of glass continued to whirl about in the air. And now we will hear what happened. A little boy and a little girl. In a large town where so many people and houses that there were not enough rooms for everybody. In a large town where there were so many people and houses that were not enough room for everybody to have a garden, lived two poor children. They were not brother and sister, but they loved each other just as much as if they were. Their parents lived opposite one another in two attics, and each family had planted a rose tree and a sweet pea in a window box. In the summer, the two children were allowed to sit out beneath the rose tree and play lovely games together all afternoon. In the winter, they could not do this, so they heated pennies on the stove and put them against the frozen window panes. This made perfect peepholes through which they could gaze at each other across the frozen gutters. His name was Kay, and her name was Greta. One day it was snowing very hard. "Those are the white bees swarming," said the old grandmother. "Have they got a queen bee too?" asked the little boy, for he knew that the real bees have one. "To be sure," said the grandmother. "She flies wherever they swarm the thickest. She is the Snow Queen, and is the biggest of them all. She never remains still upon the earth, but always returns to the black clouds. Often at midnight she flies through the streets of the town and peeps in all the windows, and then the snowflakes freeze in pretty patterns and look like flowers." "Yes, we have seen that," said both children. They knew that it was true. "Can the Snow Queen come in here?" asked the little girl. "Just let her," cried the boy. "I would put her on the stove and melt her." But the grandmother stroked her hair and told some more stories. That evening, when little Kay was going to bed, he jumped on the chair by the window and peeped through the little hole. A few snowflakes were falling, and one of them, the largest, lay on the edge of the window boxes. The snowflake grew larger and larger, till it took the form of a maiden, dressed in the finest white gauze. She was so beautiful and delicate, but all ice, hard, glittering ice. She nodded at the window, and beckoned to Kay with her hand. The little boy was frightened at the sight of her, and sprang down from the chair. Suddenly it seemed as if a great white bird had flown past the window. The next day the weather cleared. Not long after, a thaw set in and spring appeared. With the warm spring sunshine, the countryside turned a soft green. The swallows worked busily in their nests, and Kay and Greta played together once more in their little garden high on the rooftop. They knew that summer had come at last, when the little rose trees burst into glorious bloom. One day the children were looking at a picture book. The clock in the great church tower had just struck 5, when Kay suddenly exclaimed, "Oh, something had stung my heart, and now I've got something in my eye." Greta threw her arm around his neck. He blinked his eye again and again, but no, she could see nothing in them. "I think it is gone now," said he. But it had not gone. It was one of the tiny splinters from the magic mirror we have heard about, the mirror that turned whatever was fine and good reflected in it into something small and ugly. And the splinter had found its way to poor Kay's heart, which began to change into a lump of ice. His heart did not hurt him at all, but the splinter was still there. "Why are you crying?" he asked Greta. "It makes you look so ugly." "There's nothing the matter with me. Just look. That rose is all worm-eaten, and this one is stunned. What ugly roses they are." And he began to pull them to pieces. "Kay, what are you doing?" cried the little girl, and she threw up her hands. When he saw how frightened she was, he pulled off another rose and ran inside to his window, away from the dear little Greta. When she came later on with a picture book, he said that it was only fit for babies. And when his grandmother told them stories, he always interrupted with, "But," and then he would get behind her and put on her spectacles and mimic everything she did. Very soon he could imitate whatever was odd or ugly about the people who lived on their street. When winter came, he began to love the cold. Each day he would take a magnifying glass and hold it over his blue coat while the snowflakes fell on it. "Look in the glass, Greta. They are much more perfect than real flowers. If only they did not melt." One morning Kay went out with his warm gloves on and his little sled hung over his shoulder. He shouted to Greta, "I don't want to play with you. I'm going to the marketplace to be with the other boys." And away he went. In the marketplace, the boldest boy often used to fasten their sleds to the rears of the carts of the farmers, and then they got a good ride. That day, when Kay and the other boys were in the middle of their games, there drove into the square a large white sled, and in it sat a figure dressed in a white fur coat and a white fur cap. The sled drove around the square twice. Suddenly it came to a short stop, and Kay fastened his little sled behind it and was pulled away. The sled began to go more and more quickly. The driver turned around from time to time and nodded to Kay in a friendly way, as if they had known each other before. Every time Kay turned to unfasten his sled, the driver nodded again, and Kay sat still. So they drove swiftly out of the town. The snow began to fall so thickly that the little boy could not see his hands before him as they sped along. He turned to unfasten the cord to get free of the big sled, but it was of no use. His little sled could not be loosened, and on they went like the wind. He cried out, but nobody heard him. He was dreadfully frightened. The snowflake grew larger and larger, till they looked like great white birds, and all at once the large sled stopped, and the figure who was driving stood up. It was a lady, tall and slim and glittering. Her fur coat and cap were made entirely of snow. It was the Snow Queen. "We have made good time," she said, "but you are almost frozen. Creep in under my cloak." And she held him close to her in the sled and drew the cloak over him. He felt as though he were sinking into a snowdrift. "Are you still cold?" she asked, and kissed him on the forehead. The kiss was as cold as ice, and reached down to his heart, which was already frozen into half a lump of ice. "My sled! Don't forget my sled!" He thought of that first, and they fastened it to one of the white birds who flew behind with the sled on its back. The Snow Queen kissed Kay again, and he forgot all about little Greta, his grandmother, and everybody else at home. "Now I must not kiss you any more," she said, "or I will kiss you to death." Then away they flew, over forests and lakes, over seas and land. Around them whistled the cold wind. The wolves howled, and the snow hissed. Over them flew the black, shrieking crows. But high up the moon shone, large and bright, and thus Kay passed the long, long winter night. During the day, he slept at the Snow Queen's feet. The old woman and her magic garden is next. But what happened to little Greta when Kay did not come back? What had become of him? Nobody knew. The other boys told how they had seen him fasten his sled to a large one which had driven out of the town gate. Greta cried a great deal. The winter was long and dark to her. Then the spring came, and with it the warm sunshine. "I will go and look for Kay," said Greta. So she went down to the river and climbed into a little boat that lay on the bank. Presently the stream began to carry it away. The boat glided along, passing trees and fields. Then Greta saw a large cherry orchard, in which stood a house with strange red, blue, and yellow windows, and a straw roof. Before the door stood 2 wooden soldiers at attention. Greta thought they were alive and called to them, but naturally they did not answer. The current swept the boat straight towards the bank. Greta called still louder, and a very old woman came out of the house. She leaned upon a church and wore a large sun hat, painted with the most beautiful flowers. "You poor child," said the woman. And then she stepped into the water, brought the boat in close with her crutch and her crutch, and lifted little Greta out. "And now come and tell me who you are and how you have come here," she said. And taking Greta's hand, she led her into the house and shut the door. The windows were very high and painted red, blue, and yellow, so that the light came through in strange colors. On the table was a bowl of the most delicious cherries, and the woman let Greta eat as many as she liked. While she combed her hair with a gold comb, the beautiful sunny hair rippled and shone around the friendly face. "I have always longed to have a dear little girl like you," said the old woman. "You shall see how happy we will be together." And as she combed Greta's hair, Greta thought less and less about Kay. For the old woman was a witch, but not a wicked witch. She only enchanted now and then to amuse herself. She did want to keep the little Greta very much, but she went into the garden and waved her crooked stick over all the rosebuds, and they disappeared into the black earth, leaving no trace of where they had been. The witch was afraid that if Greta saw the roses, they would remind her of her own roses and of Kay, and she would run away. Then she led Greta out into the garden. "How glorious it is, and what lovely scents filled the air!" Greta jumped for joy and played in the garden till the sun set behind the tall cherry trees. Then she went to sleep in the beautiful bed with red silk pillows filled with violets, like your middle name, Violets. And she slept soundly and dreamed as if the queen does on her wedding day. She slept soundly and dreamed as a queen does on her wedding day. The next day she played again amongst the flowers in the warm sunshine, and so many days passed by. Greta knew every flower, but although there were so many, it seemed to her as if one was missing. but she could not remember which. One day she wanted to look at the old woman's sun hat, and one with painted flowers on it, and there she saw a rose. A good witch had forgotten about the one when she made the other roses disappear into the black earth. It is so difficult to think of everything. Why there are no roses here, cried Greta. And then she sat down and cried, but her tears fell on the spot where the rose bushes had sunk, and when her warm tears watered the earth, the bush came up in full bloom, just as it had been before. Greta kissed the roses and thought of the lovely ones at home, and with them came the thought of Kay. "Oh, what have I been doing?" said the little girl. "I wanted to look for Kay." She ran to the end of the garden. The gate was shut, but she pushed against the rusty lock, and so that it sprung open. Then she ran barefoot out of the garden. No one came after her. At last she could not run any longer, and she sat down on the large stone. When she looked around, she saw that the summer was over. It was late autumn. The season had never changed in the old woman's beautiful garden, where there was sunshine and flowers all the year round. "My goodness, how much time I've wasted," said Greta. "It's almost winter. I cannot rest any longer." And she sprung up to run on. Oh, how tired and sore her little feet were, and all around her it became colder and colder. The prince and the princess. After a while, Greta had to rest again. While she was sitting, she looked up, and there on the snow in front of her was a large crow. It had been looking at her for some time, and it nodded its head and said, "Caw, caw, good day." Then it asked the little girl where she was going all alone, like that in the world. Greta told the crow her story and asked if he had seen Kay. The crow nodded very thoughtfully and said, it might be. "What do you think you have?" cried the little girl, and she smothered him with her kisses. "Gently, gently," said the crow. "It might be little Kay, but now he has forgotten you for the princess." "Does he live with the princess?" asked Greta. Then the crow told her everything he knew. "In the kingdom in which we are now sitting lives a princess who is dreadfully clever. She has read all the newspapers in the world and then forgotten them again. She is as clever as that. The other day she was sitting on a throne, and that is not such fun as people think." Then she began to say, "Why should I not marry?" But she wanted a husband who knew how to answer when spoken to, not one who would stand up stiffly looking superior. That would be too boring. When she told all the ladies of the court that, they were delighted. "You can believe every word I say," continued the crow. "I have a tame sweetheart in the palace, and she tells me everything." Of course, his sweetheart was a crow. Every newspaper came out next morning with a border of hearts and the princess's initials, and inside you could read that the handsome young man might come into the palace and speak to the princess, and whoever spoke best should become her husband. "Indeed," said the crow, "you can certainly believe me. It is as true as that as I am sitting here." Young men arrived in streams, but nothing came of it. On the first or the second day, the suitors were talkative enough in the streets, but once they went inside the palace gates and saw the guards in silver braided uniforms, and the footmen of the gold braided uniforms lining the stairs, and the great hall all lit up, Then their wits left them entirely. When they stood in front of the throne where the princess sat, they could think of nothing to say except to repeat the last word she had spoken, and she did not care to hear that again. It seemed as if they were walking in their sleep until, when out of the street again, they were able to speak once more. There was a line of young men stretching from town to gate of the castle. They were hungry and thirsty, but in the palace they did not even get a glass of water. Some of the cleverest had thought to bring slices of bread and butter with them, but they did not share with their neighbor, for they thought, if he looks hungry, the princess will not have him. "But what about Kay?" asked Greta. "When did he come? Was he in the crowd?" "Wait a bit. We are coming to him." On the third day, a little figure, without horse or carriage, walked jauntily up to the palace. His eyes shone as yours do. He had a lovely, curly hair, but very shabby clothes. "That was Kay," cried Greta with delight. "Oh, I have found him," and he clasped her neck, and she clasped her hands. "He had a little bundle on his back," said the crow. "It must have been his sled." "Possibly," said the crow. I did not see for certain, but I know from my sweetheart that when he came to the palace gate and saw the royal guards in silver and the footmen in gold on the streets, he was not in the least bit put out. He nodded to them, saying, 'It must be rather dull standing on these stairs. I would rather go inside.'" The hills are ablaze with lights. Counselors and ambassadors were walking about carrying gold trays. It was enough to make one nervous. The boy's boots cracked noisily, but he was not frightened. "That must be Kay," said Greta. "I know he had new boots on. I've heard them cracking in his grandmother's room." "They did crack, certainly," said the crow, and not one bit afraid, up he went to the princess, who was sitting in a large pearl as round as a spinning wheel. All the ladies in waiting were standing around with their attendants, and the lords in waiting with their attendants. "It must have been dreadful," said little Greta, "and Kay did win the princess. I heard from my tame sweetheart that he was cheerful and quick-witted. He had not come to woo, he said, but to listen to the princess's wisdom, and the end of it was that they fell in love with each other. That must have been Kay. He was always so clever. He could do sums with fractions." "Oh, won't you lead me to the palace?" begged Greta. "Oh, that's easily asked," said the crow, "but how are we to manage that? I must talk it over with my tame sweetheart. She may be able to advise us, but I may as well tell you that a little girl like you could never get permission to enter the palace." "Oh, I will get in," said Greta. "When Kay hears that I am there, he will come out at once and fetch me." "Wait for me by the fence," said the crow, and he nodded his head and flew away. It was late in the evening when he came back. "Caw, caw," he cried, "and I am giving you her love, and here is a little roll for you." She took it out of the kitchen. "There's plenty there, and you must be hungry. The guards in silver braid and the footmen in gold will not allow you to come into the palace. But don't cry. You shall get in all right. My sweetheart knows a little back staircase which leads to the bedchamber, and she knows where to find the key." Later that evening they went into the palace garden, and when the lights were put out one by one, the crow led Greta to the back door. Oh, how Greta's heart beat with anxiety and longing. It seemed as if she were going to do something wrong, but she only wanted to know if it was little Kay. Yes, it must be he. She remembered so well his clever eyes, his curly hair. She could see him smiling, and he did when when they were at home under the rose trees. He would be so pleased to see her and to hear how they all were at home. Now they were on the stairs, and the little lamp was burning, and on the landing stood the tame crow. She put her head on one side and looked at Greta. She bowed as her grandmother had taught her. My fiance has told me many nice things about you. My dear young lady, the crow said, you will take the lamp while I go in front. We go this way so as to meet no one. They walked through the beautiful rooms until they came to the bedchamber. In the middle of it were two beds shaped like lilies, one all white, in which the princess lay, and the other red, in which Greta hoped to find Kay. She pushed aside the curtain and saw a slim brown neck. Oh, it was Kay. She called his name out loud, holding the lamp towards him. Wake up! He woke up and turned his head, and she saw that it was not Kay. It was only his neck that was like Kay's, but he was young and handsome. The princess sat up in her lily bed and asked who was there. Then Greta cried and told her story and all that the crow had done. You poor child, said the prince and the princess, and they praised the crow and said that they were not angry with them, but that they must not do it again. Now they should have a reward. Would you like to fly away free? The princess asked the birds. Or will you take a permanent place as court crows with which you can get in the kitchen? They both bowed and asked for a permanent apartment, for they thought of their old age. They put Greta to bed, and she folded her hands, thinking as she fell asleep. How good people and animals are to me. The next day she was dressed from head to foot in silk and satin. The prince and the princess wanted her to stay on in the palace, but she begged for a little carriage, a horse, and a pair of shoes, so that she might go out again into the world to look for Kay. They gave her a month as well as some shoes. She was warmly dressed, and when she was ready, there in front of the door stood a coach of pure gold, with a coachman, footman, and outriders, all wearing fine gold crowns. The prince and the princess helped her into the carriage and wished her good luck. Goodbye, goodbye, called the prince and the princess. And little Greta cried, and the crow cried. The wild crow, who was now married, drove with her for the first 3 miles. His wife could not come because she had a bad headache. When the wild crow had said goodbye, he flew up into the tree and flapped his big black wings for as long as the carriage was in the sled. Okay, this is the little robber girl. It's all the same story. Okay. They drove on and came to a dark forest, which the coach lit up like a torch as it passed through. When a band of robbers saw the carriage, they rushed out, exclaiming, "Gold! It's gold!" And they seized the horses, killed the coachman, oh my gosh, footmen, and outriders, and dragged Greta out of the carriage. "What a plump and tender morsel! I will eat her for my supper," said one of the robber queens, and she drew her long knife, which glittered horribly. "You shall not kill her," cried the queen's little daughter. "She shall play with me. She shall give me her muff and her beautiful dress, and she shall sleep with me in my bed." The little robber girl was as big as Greta, but she was stronger and broader, with dark hair and black eyes that looked a little sad. She threw her arms around Greta and said, I will not let them kill you so long as you do not make me angry. Are you a princess?" "No," answered Greta, "I'm not." And she began to tell all that had happened to her and how dearly she loved little Kay. The robber girl listened attentively, and when the tale was finished, she took Greta to the corner of the robbers' camp where she slept. Perched the rafters all around were more than 100 pigeons, who seemed to be asleep, but who fluttered a little when the two girls appeared. A reindeer came up and nestled the robber girl while she teased it by tickling it with her long, sharp knife. Greta lay awake for some time, for she did not know whether she was going to live or die in the robbers' camp. "Coo, coo," said the pigeons. "Who have seen little Kay?" "We have seen little Kay. A white bird carried his sled while he was sitting in the Snow Queen's sled. They drove over the forest as we were sitting on our nest. She breathed on our young, and all dead except two. Coo, coo." "What are you saying up there?" cried Greta. Where was the Snow Queen going? Do you know anything at all?" "She was probably traveling to Lampland, where there is always ice and snow." asked the reindeer. "There is marvelous ice and snow there," said the reindeer. "One can run about in a great sparkling valleys. There the Snow Queen has her summer palace. But her best palace is up in the North Pole, on one of the islands called Spitzbergen." In the morning, Greta told the little robber girl all that the pigeons had said. She nodded. "Do you know where Lampland is?" she asked the reindeer, who should know better than I, said the beast, and his eyes sparkled. "I was born and bred there on the snowfields." "Listen," said the robber girl to Greta. You see that all the robbers have gone. Only my mother is left, and she takes a nap in the afternoons. Then I shall do something for you." When her mother had fallen asleep, the robber girl went up to the reindeer and said, "I am going to set you free, so that you can run to Lampland. But you must go quickly and carry the little girl to the Snow Queen's palace, where her playmate is. You must have heard all that she has told me, for she spoke loud enough." The reindeer leaped high for joy. The robber girl lifted the little Greta and tied her firmly onto the reindeer. She even gave her a little pillow for a saddle. "You must wear your fur boots," she said, "for it will be cold. But I shall keep your muff. It's such a pretty one. And I'm going to give you my mother's big fur gloves, so that you won't freeze. They will come right up to your elbows." And Greta wept for joy. "Don't make such faces," said the robber girl. "You should look happy now. And here are 2 loaves of bread and a sausage, so you won't be hungry." When those were tied to the reindeer's back, the robber girl opened the door, called in all the big dogs, cut through the reindeer's halter with a sharp knife, and said to him, "Off with you now, but take good care of the little girl." And Greta stretched out her hands with the large fur gloves towards the little robber girl and said goodbye. Then the reindeer flew over the ground, through the great forest, as fast as he could. The wolves howled, the ravens screamed, and the sky seemed on fire. "Those are my dear old northern lights," said the reindeer. "Look how they glow." And he ran faster and faster still, day and night. The loaves and the sausage were eaten, and then they came to Lapland. The Lapp woman and the Finn woman. So the Lapp woman and the Finn woman. They stopped at a wretched little house. The roof almost touched the ground, and the door was so low that you had to creep in and out. There was no one in the house except a little Lapp woman who was cooking fish over an oil lamp. The reindeer told Greta's whole story, but first he told his own, for he seemed to him much more important. And Greta was so cold that she could not speak. "Ah, you poor creature," said the Lapp woman, "you have still further to go. You must go over 100 miles into Finland, for there the Snow Queen lives. And every single night she burns blue flares. I will scribble a few words on a dried codfish, for I have no paper, and you must give it to the Fern woman, for she can give you better advice than I can." And when Greta was warmed up and had something to eat and drink, the Lapp woman wrote a few lines on the dried cod and told Greta to take care of it. Then she tied her securely onto the reindeer's back, and away they went again. The whole night was ablaze with northern lights, and then they came to Finland and knocked at the Finn woman's chimney, for it was so cold she had no door at all. Inside it was so hot that the Finn woman were almost nothing. She drew off Greta's fur gloves and boots and loosened her clothes. Finally she read what was written on the codfish. She read it over 3 times till she knew it by heart, and then put the fish in her saucepan to cook, for she never wasted anything. Soon the reindeer told his story, and after his little Greta's. And then the Finn woman blinked her eyes, but said nothing. "You are very clever, I know," said the reindeer. "Won't you give the little girl a drink so that she may have the strength of 12 men and overpower the Snow Queen?" "The strength of 12 men," said the Finn woman. "That would not help much. It's true that little Kay is with the Snow Queen, and he likes everything there very much and thinks it's the best place in the whole world. That is because he has a splinter of glass in his heart and a tiny chip of it in his eye. If those do not come out, he will never be free, and the Snow Queen will keep him in her power. But can't you give little Greta something so that she can have power over the Snow Queen?" "I can give her no greater power than she already has. Don't you see how great it is? Don't you see how men and beasts help her when she wanders into the wide world with her bare feet? She is powerful already, because she is a dear little innocent child. If she herself cannot conquer the Snow Queen and remove the glass splinter that are in little Kay, we cannot help her. The Snow Queen's garden begins 2 miles from here. You can carry the little girl so far. Put her down by the large bush with red berries that stands in the snow, and you must come back here as fast as you can." When the Fern woman lifted Greta onto the reindeer, and away he sped. "Oh, I have left my gloves and boots behind," cried Greta. She missed them in the piercing cold. but the reindeer did not dare to stop. On he ran till he came to the bush with the red berries. There he sat Greta down and kissed her, and big tears ran down his cheeks. Then he ran back, leaving the poor girl without shoes or gloves in the middle of the bitter cold of Finland. She went on as fast as she could. A regiment of gigantic snowflakes came amongst her, but they melted even before they touched her, and she continued with fresh courage. The Snow Queen's palace. And now we must see what Kay was doing. He was not thinking of Greta, and never dreamed that she was standing right outside the Snow Queen's palace. The walls of the palace were built of driven snow, and the doors and windows of piercing winds. There were more than 100 hills in it, the largest several miles long, all made of frozen snow. The bright northern lights lit them up, and the very large and empty and cold and glimmering. The bright northern lights lit them up, and very large and empty and cold and glittering they were. In the middle of the great hill was a frozen lake which had cracked in 1,000 pieces. Here the Snow Queen used to sit when she was at home. Little Kay was almost black and blue with cold, but he never felt it, for the Snow Queen has kissed away his feelings, and his heart was a lump of ice. He was sitting in a hall, pulling about some sharp, flat pieces of ice and trying to put them together into a pattern. He thought they were beautiful, but that was because of the splinter of glass in his eye. He was able to fit them inside a great many shapes, but he hardly wanted to make them spell the word love. The Snow Queen had said, "If you spell out that word, you will be your own master. I still give you the whole world and a new sled." But Kay could not do it. "Today I must fly to warmer countries," said the Snow Queen. "I must go and stir up my black kettles." That was what she called Mount Etna and Mount Vesuvius. Mount Vesuvius, Vesuvius. Vesuvius. And off she flew, leaving Kay alone in the great hall, trying to do his puzzle. He sat so still that he would have thought he was frozen. You would have thought he was frozen. Then little Greta stepped into the palace hall. The ringing winds quieted down as if they had fallen asleep. When she appeared, she caught sight of Kay and ran to put her arms around his neck, crying, "Kay, dear little Kay, I have found you at last." But Kay sat quite still and cold. Greta wept hot tears, which fell on his breast and thawed his heart so that the glass splinter was dissolved. He looked at her and burst into tears. He cried so much that the splinter swam out of his eye. Then he recognized her and cried out, "Greta, dear little Greta, where have you been so long? And where have I been?" And he looked around him. "How cold it is here! How huge and empty!" He threw his arms around Greta, and she laughed and wept for joy. It was such a happy time that the pieces of ice even danced around them for joy. When they grew tired, Kay and Greta lay down, and as they fell asleep they melted the ice, forming the word that the Snow Queen had said Kay must spell in order to become his own master. Greta kissed his cheeks, and they grew rosy. She kissed his eyes, and they sparkled like hers. She kissed his hands and feet. He became warm and glowing. The Snow Queen might come home now, but they had his release. The word love stood written in the sparkling ice. They took each other's hands and wandered out of the great palace. They talked about the grandmother and the roses and the window boxes and whatever they want. And wherever they went, the winds calmed down and the sun came out. When they reached the bush with the red berries, there stood the reindeer waiting for them. He carried Kay and Greta first to the Finn woman, who warmed them in her hot room and gave them advice for their journey home. Then they went to the Lapp woman, who gave them new clothes and let them borrow her sled until they reached the border of their own country. The reindeer ran alongside the sled till they came to the fields fresh with the first spring green. Then he said goodbye. When they reached the forest, which was bursting into buds, there came riding out of it the young girl on the splendid horse. She was wearing a red cap and carrying pistols in her belt. It was the little robber girl, who was tired of staying at home and wanted to go out into the world. She and Greta recognized each other at once. "You are a fine one," she said to Kay. "I wonder if you deserve to be run after all over the world." But Greta patted her cheeks and asked after the prince and the princess. "They are traveling about," said the robber girl. "And the crow?" asked Greta. "Oh, and the crow is dead," answered the robber girl. "His tame sweetheart is a widow now, and hops about with a bit of black creep on her leg. She makes a great fuss, but it's all nonsense. Now tell me what happened to you and how you found him." And Kay and Greta told her all. "What a story," said the little robber girl. She shook her hands with them and promised that if she ever passed through their town, she would come and see them. Then she rode on. Greta and Kay went home hand in hand. There they found the grandmother and everything just as it had been. But when they went through the doorway, they found that they were grown up. There were the roses in the window boxes in the summer. Warm, glorious summer. They were gone so long that they grew up. Alright, baby. Let's do Lila Tove and Good Night to You. Lila Tove and good night to you. Lila Tove, may your dreams come true. We sing Lila Tove, may Israel protect you throughout the night until we reach the morning light. Karina, baby, I love you and I miss you and I can't wait to see you. Like Papa used to always say, Mama's his sun, Papa's my moon. You are a rainbow baby. You're quite literally our rainbow baby and we love you. No matter what, honey. I will always love you. I miss you. I miss you so much. Life is a bunch of character building experiences and learning lessons. I've spent a lot of time crying over all this and my heart's just heavy, but I just have to wait and be patient in my waiting. That's what I'm trying to do. I love you and I miss you, honey. I will always love you.